August 1944. German generals are celebrating in their command bunkers. They're watching Allied tanks grind to a halt across France. Not from German bullets, but from something far simpler: they've run out of gas. Field Marshal von Rundstedt is smiling, telling his officers, "We don't need to defeat them. Physics will do it for us. They're 400 miles from their supply ports. Their offensive is dead." But then something happens that these brilliant military minds never anticipated. Something so audacious, so unprecedented, that it would become the logistical miracle of World War II. Convoy appears, but not just any convoy. 6,000 trucks, 23,000 men, operating 24 hours a day on a single highway, painted with red balls, driven mostly by African American soldiers who weren't even supposed to be in combat roles. And they're about to do the impossible. This is the story of how a supply operation became Hitler's worst nightmare, and why German generals would later admit, "We never calculated for this." Summer 1944. Operation Overlord has succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. After the D-Day landings in June, Allied forces have broken through German defenses at Normandy, and Patton's Third Army is racing across France at speeds that shock even the Germans. But there's a problem, a massive problem. The Allied war machine is devouring supplies at an insane rate. A single armored division needs 300,000 gallons of gasoline per day. Multiply that by dozens of divisions, add in ammunition, food, medical supplies, and spare parts, and you have a logistical nightmare. General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group alone needs 20,000 tons of supplies every single day. In their command posts, German generals are actually relieved because they've studied Napoleon and understand the tyranny of distance. Major General Alfred Jodl writes in his diary, "The Allies have outrun their supply lines. They must stop. It's not opinion. It's mathematics." The math is brutally simple. Allied supplies land at Normandy beaches. Patton's tanks are now 400-plus miles inland. Normal military supply doctrine says you can't sustain an army more than 100 miles from its base, and the French railway system is destroyed from Allied bombing. The Allies only have one viable route: a single highway, and everyone knows you can't supply an entire army group on one road. At Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, the crisis is real. Patton is screaming into phones, "My men can taste Germany, and you're telling me to stop because of gas?" Eisenhower faces an impossible choice: halt the advance, giving Germans time to regroup and potentially prolonging the war by months, costing thousands of lives, or try something that has never been done in military history. August 25, 1944, a plan is born in desperation. They would create a dedicated highway, a Red Ball Express, named after railroad terminology for expedited freight. This 700-mile loop would be exclusively for supply trucks. No civilian traffic, no military traffic except supply vehicles, just truck after truck after truck. The numbers they're planning are insane. 6,000 trucks operating 24/7, one truck every 30 seconds, targeting 12,500 tons per day. To put this in perspective, this is like trying to move the entire cargo of 50 modern Boeing 747s every single day using 2.5-ton trucks on war-damaged roads. Here's where the story gets interesting. The majority of Red Ball drivers, about 75%, were African American soldiers from quartermaster truck companies. In 1944 America, these men faced segregation at home, and the military didn't trust them with combat roles, relegating them to support positions like truck drivers, cooks, and laborers. But Lieutenant General John C.H. Lee saw what others didn't. These men were some of the most skilled drivers in the Army. Many had driven trucks in civilian life. They were mechanically inclined, and critically, they were motivated. Private William Scott from the 3,549th Quartermaster Truck Company recalled, "They told us straight. The Luftwaffe would strafe us, we'd be driving at night without headlights. The roads were cratered, trucks would break down in enemy territory, and some of us wouldn't make it back." Every man in the room raised his hand. The Red Ball Express operated under strict protocols that sound insane even today. Drivers worked in shifts of 24 to 36 hours straight. Trucks maintained speeds of 35 miles per hour regardless of conditions. No stopping except for breakdowns or ambush. Convoys ran with minimal lighting at night to avoid German aircraft, and checkpoints were established every 50 miles for fuel and maintenance. On August 25, 1944, the first convoy rolled out from St. Lo, and what happened next would be studied in military academies for decades. The trucks formed an unbroken chain stretching for hundreds of miles, and from the air, it looked like a giant red snake crawling across France because each truck was marked with a red ball on a white background for identification. The conditions were nightmarish. Roads designed for civilian traffic were now carrying military vehicles weighing several tons. August heat turned truck cabs into ovens reaching 120 degrees. Dust clouds from convoys reduced visibility to near zero, and German aircraft still controlled parts of the sky. Private First Class Leon Bass remembered, "You'd be driving and suddenly there's explosions ahead. You don't stop. You don't slow down. You swerve around the burning wreckage and keep going because 50 trucks are behind you and they're not stopping either." The drivers developed their own survival techniques. Sleeping while driving in short bursts, navigating by counting telephone poles when it was too dark to see, using hand signals because radio silence was mandatory, and forming brotherhoods within companies to watch each other's backs. September 1944, German intelligence officers are receiving reports that don't make sense. American tanks that should have been out of fuel for weeks are still advancing. Supply depots that should be empty are full, and most puzzling of all, there's some kind of massive convoy operation happening on a scale they've never seen. Oberst Friedrich von Mellenthin, Chief of Staff of the German 5th Panzer Army, would later write in his memoirs, "We made our calculations based on conventional military logistics. We assumed the Americans would face the same limitations we did, the same limitations every army in history has faced. We were wrong." The Red Ball Express was achieving the impossible. Between August 25th and November 16th, 1944, they transported 412,193 tons of supplies, which is enough to fill 164,877 modern shipping containers. They did this with a 90% on-time delivery rate, which is better than most modern civilian shipping companies. But here's what really shocked the Germans. The operation wasn't even using the most experienced troops, it was running on damaged infrastructure, and it operated 24/7 despite air attacks and mechanical failures. German Field Marshal Walter Model reported to Berlin, "The American supply operation is unlike anything in military history. They're violating every principle of logistics, and yet it's working. We cannot count on their supply lines collapsing." This realization was devastating because the entire German defensive strategy in fall 1944 was based on the assumption that Allied forces would have to stop and consolidate their supply lines. Behind the statistics were individual acts of courage that never made the headlines. Corporal Charles Stevenson drove for 48 hours straight when his relief driver was killed by a strafing run, delivering critical ammunition to units that were completely surrounded. Private Jimmy Ruckert's truck broke down in enemy territory, so he spent 3 hours repairing it in darkness while German patrols passed within 100 yards of his position. Staff Sergeant William E. Thomas organized a rescue mission when a convoy was ambushed, using their trucks to block German fire while evacuating wounded drivers. The racial dynamics of the operation created strange contradictions. These men faced discrimination at every turn when they returned to rear areas for rest, segregated sleeping quarters, separate mess halls, and constant reminders that they were considered second-class soldiers. But on the Red Ball route itself, a different culture emerged where rank and race mattered less than competence and courage, where white officers depended on black drivers for their survival, and where the shared danger created bonds that transcended the racism of the era. Lieutenant Thomas J. Edwards, a white officer commanding a predominantly black company, wrote home, "I've learned more about true equality on this highway than in my entire life. When shells are falling and trucks are burning, nobody cares about the color of the driver in front of them, only whether they'll make it through together." The Red Ball Express officially ended on November 16, 1944, when the port of Antwerp finally opened, providing a closer supply base for Allied forces, but its impact continued to reverberate. In those 83 days of operation, it had achieved what German generals said was impossible, what even Allied planners thought was a desperate gamble, and what would change military logistics forever. The numbers tell part of the story. 412,193 tons delivered, 6,000 trucks in operation, 23,000 personnel involved, 89,939,669 gallons of gasoline transported, and 0 days of operation halted, due to enemy action. But the real impact goes deeper. Patton's Third Army continued its advance when it should have been stuck. The liberation of France happened months faster than German planners expected, and Hitler's hope for a stalemate in Western Europe evaporated. After the war, German generals would admit that the Red Ball Express was one of the key factors in Allied victory. General der Panzertruppe Heinrich Eberbach stated in his debriefing, "We expected logistics to be the Allies' weakness. Instead, they turned it into their greatest strength. The Red Ball operation was brilliantly executed, and we had no equivalent capability." The military lessons were studied intensively. Modern militaries developed dedicated supply routes. The concept of just-in-time military logistics was born, and the importance of sustained 24/7 operations was recognized. But perhaps the most important legacy was human. The Red Ball Express proved that black soldiers could handle complex, dangerous operations with distinction, contributing to eventual military desegregation. Many Red Ball veterans would go on to participate in the civil rights movement, bringing the same courage and determination they showed on those French highways. Today, if you drive through Normandy and follow the old highways toward Paris and beyond, you can still see remnants of the Red Ball route. Weathered signs in museums, memorial markers at rest stops, and small plaques in French villages remembering the convoys that rumbled through day and night. The story of the Red Ball Express is often overshadowed by tales of dramatic battles and famous generals, but it represents something equally important: the unglamorous, dangerous, exhausting work that actually wins wars. Those German generals who laughed in August 1944, confident that physics and mathematics would stop the Allied advance, learned a hard lesson: wars aren't just won by brilliant tactics and superior weapons, but by the determination of ordinary people doing extraordinary things under impossible conditions. The men of the Red Ball Express didn't charge enemy positions or fly fighter planes, but they did something just as crucial. They kept the war moving forward when everyone said it couldn't be done. They humiliated Hitler's generals not with bullets but with persistence and skill, and they proved that the supposedly impossible was just a challenge waiting for the right people to accept it. So the next time someone tells you something can't be done because the math doesn't work or because it's never been done before, remember those 6,000 trucks rolling through France in 1944, driven by men who weren't supposed to be heroes, accomplishing what the best military minds in Germany said was impossible, one delivery at a time until the war was won. That's the real story of the Red Ball Express. Not just a supply operation, but a testament to human determination, ingenuity, and courage in the face of impossible odds.